So number one, the most important thing, it's hard to say the most important, but this is a pretty important one, is exercise. And it amazes me that people don't do it much in their latter years, but they do it a lot in their younger years. But actually a lot of children aren't doing it today because they're on their computers and their iPads and their iPhones. And so even children aren't getting that physical activity today that naturally was. I've spoken to a few men that I've spent time with here on the island, and they tell me about their childhood. It was down by the beach all day, and it was climbing the hills. You know, that is the best childhood. And it makes a very strong body. But the body must be maintained. You know, if you've got a car, that car must be maintained. And I looked at the roofs of the houses, and some roofs are white, and other roofs are a little discoloured. And Winslow was telling me that every 2 years it's advised that you clean and whitewash the roof, that's right. So you can tell the houses that are maintained. Can you tell the bodies that are maintained? The high-intensity interval training are intervals of high intensity, and those intervals, most of the research finds that 30 seconds is a good time. If you can't do 30 seconds, do what you can. And if you can't run, exercise bike. Can't exercise bike, swim. Can't swim, rebound. Everyone can rebound. That's the little mini trampoline. And if you run on that rebounder, you will have high-intensity interval training. But most of the research has been done on an exercise bike, because on an exercise bike, you're not carrying your weight like you are when you're running up a hill. And a lot of people who are a little bit unsteady on their feet, they can hold on to that. Muscle knows no age. Did you hear that? This is whether you are 9 or 90. The body must move. Stagnant bodies breed disease, just like stagnant pools do. Body must move. So that little chunk of high intensity and then recovery. Now recovery, if a person's very fit, they might find their recovery time might be 1.5 minutes. But if they're not fit, they might go into 5 minutes recovery time. Your fitness is determined not by how hard and fast you can go, but how long you take to recover. So note your recovery time, because it will change. So let's say 2 to 3 minutes recovery, and then that is done usually for a cycle. A cycle of 6 is apparently the best. Now there's a book by Dr. Al Sears, and it's called PACE. And this is what PACE means, progressive. That means that as you're doing this, you will get better at it. And your recovery time will lessen. And you might feel like you're only half dying instead of completely dying when you get to the end of 30 seconds. So his book is PACE, progressive acceleration. You are moving. This is no gentle stroll. When my husband Michael and I do it, and we're running up the hill, we're not talking at that point. Recovery time is when we catch up on the news. So progressive acceleration, cardiopulmonary. So cardio meaning heart muscle. And that heart muscle gets stronger as it's used. Pulmonary is lungs. And this is where we're taking in the oxygen so that our cells can get down there. That's why they're saying you will receive more energy than you expend on your morning walk. It's referring to the oxygen that's going to those cells. So pulmonary. Have you heard of the Framingham Heart Study? Interesting little study in a little town of Framingham. I find it an interesting study because it's not funded by the pharmaceutical companies or the dairy industry or the grain industry. So it's one of those very rare studies that's objective. Now they set it up to prove that cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease, but 30 years later it still hasn't done that. And we're going to go into that in more detail in a minute. But you know what they found? They found that people by the age of 50 had lost 40% lung capacity. 40% lung capacity by the age of 50? Does that mean that only 60% of their cells are producing that? They found that by the age of 80, they'd lost 60% lung capacity. And how many people complain of lack of energy in the latter years of their life and they blame age? Poor old age. It gets blamed for too many things, yeah? Can you prevent that loss? Yes, by doing the high-intensity interval training. And if you've lost it, can you regain it? Yes. How? High-intensity interval training. Right now, you're breathing in 500 mil and you're breathing out 500 mil of air. When you get to the end of your 30 seconds high intensity, you're breathing in 3,600 mil. Wow. And you're breathing out 3,600 mil. So that's why his book, PACE, Progressive Acceleration Cardiopulmonary. It is your heart and your lungs that get an incredible boost. And that is affecting your blood. Because if you're breathing in 3,600 mil of air, that means every single cell of your body is getting the oxygen that it needs. Let me draw the cell again. You see this little energy cycle that I've drawn? I've drawn it as if there's one per cell. There can be hundreds. Hundreds. They're like this. Hundreds of those little energy cycles. Can you imagine if those hundreds all have an oxygen? Oh, look at that energy. Chronic fatigue syndrome, there's one cause, lack of oxygen. Now there can be, as I mentioned last night, there can be quite a few causes for lack of oxygen. And one of them could be actually lack of exercise. So we just got to do it. Now, you're on an island that has beautiful air because you've got sea everywhere. And those crashing waves produce negative ions. And negative ions are electrically charged oxygen molecules. So you're actually getting a better air than those who maybe live right in the middle of America, something like that. But you're also challenged with being in a moist, warm environment that the homes that you're living in could be breeding mould. And that's why you have to be very, very careful of that. In fact, fans don't take much electricity, you know. have the fans on to keep that air so that it helps to dry it out. And I'm sure you've been living here for a while. Some of you have been living here for many centuries, a few generations. And I'm sure there are ways that you have to keep that air clear. So you don't want to go from running up and down the beach and getting a blast of oxygen back into a damp, mouldy house. You see that? So that's very important to assess air quality. Now, the reason I've got assess air quality here is that very reason that I just mentioned to you. Because if you're breathing in bad air, if you're breathing in mouldy air, this is where you're going to be running, right up here. And that heart muscle's not going to be functioning very well. So the book, PACE, Progressive Acceleration of Cardiopulmonary Exertion. You are exerting yourself. In fact, sometimes when I'm running up the hill and it's so much effort, you think to yourself, why am I doing this? Do you know why I'm doing this? I'm doing that. I'm doing it to keep that heart with all diligence, yeah. And it's just one little nugget in the day. We've actually come to a time on planet Earth where we're at this comfortable society, is that right? Everything's comfortable. The cars are comfortable. Our houses are comfortable. There's not much discomfort. Not much discomfort at all. Well, you've got to break out of that. You've got to cause yourself a little bit of discomfort. Because you know what is discomfort? Is having a heart attack. That's severe discomfort. Severe discomfort. So having that tiny little 15 minutes of discomfort every day can actually prevent a terrible discomfort that you have no say over. The ambulance has been called. Yeah, they're carrying you. You have no say over that, do you? But you actually have more say than you think. Because if you keep the heart with all diligence, then you need never get to that. So that is the exercise that will move that body. That is the exercise that will get oxygen delivered to every cell. And we'll particularly talk about the muscle cell. There is a pathway in my brain that says it's there. Because that's what your heart is made up of. It's a muscle. It's a muscle, and it can get stronger and it can get weaker. So that is the most powerful way to strengthen that heart muscle. Now, the only time that you'll have trouble exercising is if you don't drink enough water. Keep the heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. There is one substance on the planet that is more powerful than anything else at thinning the blood. And yet it'll thin the blood to the point where, when you brush yourself, you're not going to bleed. And how many medical blood thinners do that? One lady had a skiing accident with her knee. She was a guest, and she'd had this accident when she was in her 30s. And she had plaster put on, and it hurt, and it hurt, and it always hurt. And they said, no, the plaster must stay. Eventually, she demanded that they investigate. And they found that the plaster was too tight in one area. It blocked off the blood. And they told her leг would have to be amputated. Anyway, she fought for that. And they said, all right, we'll try and save it. It's nice of them. And they put her on warfarin. Have you heard of warfarin? Warfarin is what they use to poison rats because it causes the rats to bleed to death. So they just don't give quite as much to humans, but it causes the blood to thin. She was on that for years because whenever she didn't feel well or she'd be on her feet too much or she'd fly, that leg would swell right up. They had her on so much warfarin that her nose began to bleed, her ears began to bleed, her eyes began to bleed. She'd been on the warfarin for 25 years. So she began to investigate what she could do as an alternative. And she found that if she drank at least 8 glasses of water a day, sometimes even go to 10 glasses of water, that would keep her blood nice and thin. But she also, when she came to us, found something else. So I'm going to put 8+ glasses a day, that's at least. And have you discovered that if you start really early in the morning, it's a lot easier to get it all in? And that is the salt. Now, the salt that we use should be the whole salt. So the salt that we buy is Celtic, and Celtic contains 82 minerals. So right at this point, actually I'll finish the story of this lady, and then I want to tell you the story of salt. And you will see why there's so many misconceptions about salt, and you will also understand why many doctors tell you to stop salt if you've got a heart problem. Is that right? Yeah. And you will explain and see why they say that. They have good reason for saying it, and you will see that. So this lady that came to our health retreat, she was now, you know, that almost lost the leg from the skiing accident because the cast wasn't on right. That's why when the body goes like this, you've got to listen. Because what had happened was that constant pain she was having, what was that saying? There's actually something wrong there. And the body does let you know. Unfortunately, with a heart attack, sometimes the first sign is sudden death. That's a bit late, that one, isn't it? And I'll show you why, because the arteries can be slowly blocking up and you don't know. You would know if you were exercising, because you would not be able to get the breath if the arteries were blocking up. So let's go back to the lady, because I've touched on quite a few things that I will explore in this lecture. So she began to take cayenne pepper, 1/4 teaspoon 3 times a day. She also started to drink more water and have that little bit of salt, about the size of a sesame seed, on her tongue before each glass of water. She was so excited. Now, she cannot run. She could not even cycle. So the 2 things she could do, because she's ever managing this leg, the 2 things she could do is swim, and the other is rebounding. Because as I showed you last night, when you rebound, there's no jarring. It's just this cushioning. It's a bounce. So there's no jarring. And that's began to disperse the fluid through her body. She was a very happy lady because she had learned how to manage her condition without drugs. The highest source or the highest concentration of sodium that you will find on the planet is in seawater. So seawater contains 92 minerals. Now, seawater is called an isotonic solution. That means it's got the exact same mineral balance and proportion as is found in blood, as is found in the tissues, the fluid around the tissues, bone. In fact, it's in our internal sea is the seawater. And I think I mentioned earlier in the week that Dr. Robert Thompson, who wrote the book, The Calcium Lie, he states it's the clearest indicator of a creator God, is that seawater, because it's the exact same mineral proportion and balance. Do you know in the war, the Navy used to transfuse with seawater if someone needed a blood transfusion? And it says in the sailor's manual, if you're shipwrecked, start sipping little bits of seawater often, and you will be kept alive for many days. But if you wait, don't drink any water for 3 days, so you're incredibly dehydrated, nearly dead, and drink a whole glass of water, you're in trouble. Of that 92 minerals, 30% is sodium. Now, can you see just by that illustration alone how God meant us to take sodium? God meant us to take sodium in this balanced form. You see, there are 4 vital elements needed for life. I call them the 4 vitals. Number 1 is oxygen. That's not surprising. Number 2 is water. Number 3 is sodium. Now, you can find that in any anatomy and physiology book, any biology book, any chemistry book. They're the 3 vitals. Number 4 is potassium, and potassium is found in all your fresh fruits and vegetables. They're the 4 vitals, no matter whether you're a plant or an insect or an elephant or a human. The 4 vitals. But God meant us to take that 3rd vital in its balanced form. Now, of those 92 minerals, 50% approximately is made up of chloride. So these are the first crystals formed when the water is evaporated from seawater. And because they're the first crystals formed, man scoops them up, bleaches them white, puts aluminium in it so it runs freely. There's your table salt. So table salt has 2 minerals. And sometimes some manufacturers have the hide to call it sea salt. Well, it came from the sea. Can you see that? Always be cautious if it's white and free-flowing. Now, the Celtic salt, so CS is your Celtic salt, it has 82 minerals. Whereas your Himalayan has 75 minerals. So Himalayan's pretty good. But the Celtic is even better. Now, that Celtic salt contains 3 magnesiums. It contains magnesium bromide, it contains magnesium chloride, and it contains magnesium sulfate. Now, magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. And that is why the Celtic salt, especially in this moist environment, it'll always be wet. Because it has 3 magnesiums in it. Because magnesium is a water-hungry molecule. So if you put a crystal of this salt on your tongue and chew it a little, your mucous membranes are already absorbing those minerals into your blood. And around every cell, there's a bilayered membrane. And when that magnesium is taken to the cell, it pulls the water into the cell. That's why that's the quickest way to hydrate a body, is to have that little bit of salt and then the water. Some people say to me, I don't drink water because my legs swell. I don't drink water because I'm in the little house all day. Or the bathroom, Australia called the little house. Do you know what those 2 answers tell me? The water's not getting into the cell. This is the CBD. Huh? It's staying on the outside. So how do we get it in? That's how you get it in. Something else that's exciting is that there's a little motor in that bilayered membrane, and when that salt's taken and then the water's drunk and the water's pulled into the cell, that little bilayered membrane starts spinning. And the spinning of that little motor gives us a unit of energy. Isn't it amazing what science is showing us today about this amazing creation we live in? And the psalmist that wrote in Psalm 139 verse 14, I will praise you for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, marvellous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. He didn't know about that. So can't we even more? More. So what an amazing piece of machinery we live in. In Matthew 5, verse 13, the Bible says, "Ye are the salt of the earth. If the salt hath lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is henceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under foot of men." How does the salt lose its savour? I'd like to suggest that this table salt has lost its savour. Is that it? It's Old English? Mm-hmm. What does the Bible say to do with it? It's henceforth good for nothing but to be trodden under foot of men. Mm-hmm. Now let me show you what's happening in and out of the cell. Here's our cell. The highest concentration of minerals inside the cell is potassium. The highest concentration outside the cell is sodium. Now we have sodium-potassium pumps in that bilayered membrane, and the sodium-potassium pumps are continually going like that, keeping the balance of sodium and potassium. Now let's say a person's having too much sodium. Sodium levels rise. Have you noticed that when people eat a lot of table salt, they put it on everything and sometimes don't even taste the food? Do you know why? Because those two minerals are so harsh, they kill the taste buds. So when you see that, you think, poor guy, his taste buds are dying. And so the more people use it, the more they have to use it because the taste buds are dying. So sodium, it's going up. And just about every packaged food you buy, what's it got in it? And if they put sugar in it, they can put even more sodium in it. And the person doesn't eat fruit and vegetables because it just takes too long to eat an apple. So what's happening to potassium? It's dropping. Now, there should be a small amount of sodium inside the cell, but what's happening now is sodium levels are rising, potassium levels are dropping. The sodium-potassium pumps can't keep up the pace, and with osmosis and diffusion, the largest concentration merges into the lowest. So what's happening with sodium now? It's going too high. And when sodium levels inside the cell go too high, the cell swells. And you know what that's called? High blood pressure. Your doctor's right. Table salt can cause and contribute to high blood pressure. He's right. But we need salt. We need the sodium. It's the third most vital element needed for life. And if you take the sodium in its balanced form in the Celtic salt and you're eating fresh fruit and vegetables every day, can you see that imbalance won't happen? So my suggestion is take that little crystal of Celtic salt before every glass of water. And remember, spread that water over. Then you're not rushing for the little house. And the reason you're not is because now that salt gets the water inside the cell. Dr. Lilangri is a French doctor. And when he gets someone come to him with high blood pressure, he immediately puts them on Celtic salt. Now, if they're not used to any salt, they've got to start small. Start very small, maybe half the size of a sesame seed type of salt. You'll get to know, and then ease into it. I have quite a bit, but I don't have high blood pressure. And I exercise every day. See, the more you perspire, what are you perspiring out? Have you ever tasted it? Yeah, it's salty. Yeah, it's just common sense. We need it. But we need it in its balanced form, and we need to be taking it little by little by little. So that's the salt story. I'll tell you something else. Lining your gastrointestinal tract, a villi, which we looked at the other day, on the villi, there's a receptor site. And the glucose comes through into the receptor site to be taken through to the blood by a carrier. But the carrier says, I will not take you glucose unless you come with a molecule of sodium. In fact, I memorised this from the Anatomy and Physiology book, so I could give it to you from the horse's mouth. Sodium is the main transport system of glucose across the brush border wall and into the blood. That's in the Anatomy and Physiology book. In fact, when you read it, you see the importance of sodium. But can you see why it's been misunderstood? Because it can cause high blood pressure. Because when you take that salt into your body, you now cause an imbalance in and out of the cell, thus getting the blood pressure up. So the salt's important, but it needs to be taken in its balanced form. And the cheapest way to get it is to go down that Horseshoe Cove. That's beautiful. And the water's very clear. Just try and miss the blue bottles. And it's like the soup we had tonight. It was a very nice soup. Now, if that big pot of soup, you would usually put maybe 4 teaspoons of salt, that's 4 cups of seawater. You see, a teaspoon of salt is equal to 1 cup of seawater. And it's a delicious salt. And when you cook, you don't lose your minerals. Remember that. It's like your vegetables. You cook your vegetables, you don't lose the minerals. You do if you throw the water out, because it will go into the water. So salt is very important. You see, your heart muscle requires 2 minerals for it to beat efficiently. Calcium causes constriction of the heart, magnesium relaxation. Calcium constriction, magnesium relaxation. That's why when someone specifically is wanting to conquer high blood pressure, magnesium. Magnesium can be taken, not forever, just until the blood pressure is once again brought under control, because it relaxes the heart at rest. So that can be a tool to be used to help conquer high blood pressure. Number 6. We need to be having a diet that is high in fibre. Remember what fibre does? It slowly releases the glucose, sweeps the gastrointestinal tract every day. We need to be taking generous amounts of protein. All your plant food has fibre, and the best proteins are legumes and nuts and seeds. And what a wonderful variety God gave us. Now, if you're wanting to get a little bit more exciting with your legumes, get an Indian cookbook. Tell you, they know what to do. They know how to make them taste nice. Also, a Lebanese cookbook. They've got some amazing things that you can do with. There's a hummus, there's baba ganoush, there's falafel, so many things that you can do with them. And healthy fats. Oh, no, Sister Barbara, you're getting it wrong here. What are we told when someone has a heart problem? Stop the fats. Why are they told to stop the fats? Because of cholesterol. Isn't that right? When I worked as a psychiatric nurse, we had an operating theatre. We used to do basic surgical procedures on psych patients. And I was assisting one day. We did a bypass. Oh, that is a brutal procedure. They cut the skin, then they saw the bones open, then they get clamps and pull it open, and then they cut an artery on the leg, cut the one out that's all clogged up, throw it away, and put the one from the leg there. Is that going to fix everything? You know, it just might give them a few more years. And you know, that arterial from down there, it hasn't got the same tissue. The one up here is made strong, especially to withstand a strong beat. But see, it gets a bit less by there, but you know, what else can the doctor do? Now, what the surgeon did, he said, look at this. He had the piece of artery he just cut out. He got tweezers and he started to pull this white gristle up out of, and what are we told that is? Cholesterol. So now I want to give you the truth on cholesterol. So your liver makes cholesterol, and your liver makes cholesterol according to the body's demands. And 80% of the cholesterol that your liver makes is made from glucose. And 20% of the cholesterol that your liver makes is made from fat. You see, it's not the butter on the bread, it's the bread under the butter that's the problem. The wrong guy's been shot, I have to tell you. So there are two main types of cholesterol. There's HDL, high-density lipoprotein, and there's LDL, low-density lipoprotein. HDL is called the good guy because HDL is the carrier, and it carries excess cholesterol back to the liver. That's why it's called the good guy. LDL is called the bad guy. But you know, the body doesn't make anything bad. What's LDL's role? Its role is that of a repairer and a rebuilder. That's what it is. That's what it does. But it does something else too, which is also very important. It delivers cholesterol to the brain because the brain loves cholesterol. Do you know the fattiest food on the planet with the highest cholesterol levels is breast milk in the first month of life? Because that developing brain will not develop without rich amounts of cholesterol and fat. Did you hear that? Have they banned that yet? Can you see that? So let's have a look at how these two work together. So this is an artery, and because of its low density, LDL is always on the edge. And because of its high density, HDL is always in the middle. Now let's say the person is a smoker. There are 4,000 chemicals in one cigarette, and it can poke holes in the arterial wall. Let's say the person's living in a mouldy house. Do you know when mould gets into the blood, it's damaging. No wonder the Bible says destroy the house. It can poke holes in the arterial wall. And if a person's on a high wheat, high sugar, high alcohol diet, that feeds it more holes. Let's say the person's got a mouthful of mercury fillings, or they're eating huge amounts of fish because they think it's a healthy food. Do you know, there's hardly a fish today that doesn't have mercury in it. And mercury is a neurotoxin. It damages the cells. Who's going to plug up the holes, students? The repairer and the rebuilder. LDL, it's already on the edge. They're ready to plug up the hole because if we don't plug the hole up, you're going to bleed into the tissues and die. The body's constantly going to great lengths to keep us alive. And the person doesn't realise the dangers. So what's happening to the arterial wall? I don't know if anyone's explored that. If you go to YouTube and watch the documentary Mouldy, I think it only goes for half an hour. Whew. These people couldn't find out what was wrong with them. They had all sorts of complaints. One lady got to the point where she could hardly walk anymore. It was a mouldy house. Cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. To say that cholesterol causes heart disease is like saying the fire trucks are causing the fires. Well, they must. They're always there. Huh? That's like saying that we've just discovered that ambulances are causing all the accidents. Well, they must. They're always there. You see, cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. So what causes heart disease? Damaged arteries. I'll give you a story to illustrate. He's a friend of mine. His name's Dr. David Harris. He's a cranial sacral chiropractic expert. He's very, very fit, late 50s. He goes to Europe every year, cycles for 200 Ks just for fun. very fit. And I think it was 3 years ago now, he was getting a little bit breathless, and the doctor did a scan and found out that his arteries were almost totally blocked. He had to have 5 bypasses. They said, "You're a walking time bomb, we're going to do something right now." They're so blocked. I talked to him a couple of months later when he was recovering. He said, "It's genetics, Barb, it's genetics." I said, "Oh." I said, "Genetics loads the gun, David. Lifestyle pulls the trigger." But he said, "Barb, look at me. I cycle, I'm a vegetarian, I drink lots of water. Must be genetics." I said, "David, go to my liver lecture," because on YouTube on my liver lecture I cover this because it's the liver that makes cholesterol. We talked about 5 days later, he said, "I've discovered what it is." I said, "What is it, David?" He said, "When I was a child, my parents were chain smokers." Now what's this child breathing in? You know, passive smoke can sometimes be more dangerous than the smoke. So his arteries were already being damaged as a child. He said, in 2010, I wanted to put on more muscle, so I started eating swordfish every day. Now, swordfish is a large fish, and mercury is bioaccumulative. You know what that means? The bigger the fish, the higher the concentrations of mercury. You know, in Australia, the Australian Health Department have issued a warning, pregnant women don't eat swordfish because of the mercury levels. After 6 months of eating like this, he got mercury poisoning. So what caused the build-up in his arteries, students? See, damage to the arterial wall. First of all, because of it had already been set up from a young age, breathing in chain-smoking parents. You can imagine that. And this was a time when they smoked in the car. And then the mercury on top of that. He was so excited to see why. You see, we should always have that detective hat on. Why are these things so? Because there is always a reason. That's why the proverb says, "The curse causeless shall not come." There's always a reason. So he and his wife, with great excitement, came and did our health program. They came in for 2 weeks. He is off all his medication now. You see, what's happening now is when people have a heart attack, they're put on cholesterol-lowering medication, yeah? You see, what that cholesterol-lowering medication does is it blocks the pathway in the liver that the liver uses to make cholesterol, so it's not making so much. But that same pathway that the liver uses to make cholesterol, it uses to make coenzyme Q10. What's coenzyme Q10? That's your heart protective enzyme. So a person can go on cholesterol-lowering medication and increase their risk of heart disease. Whew. Yeah, I was waiting for the mercy. Ugh. Now, I'm not sure how you say your levels, but I know in America, they say that you should be under about 190. Would that be about what your levels are? Well, it was 2 years ago now, I ran a health retreat in Alabama, and a lady did our program who was 69. She was in very good condition for her age. She ate well, she exercised. I would have thought she would have been 55. She said, "I'm a nutritionist." She said, "I trained in university 40 years ago." She said, 40 years ago when I trained and did my PhD in nutrition, we were told that under 300 was perfectly normal. Praise God that I met this woman. It was in the textbooks. It's everywhere. So what have they done? Changed the figures. Oh, does that mean we've got a reduction in heart disease now? No. You know what it means? It means that more people are on cholesterol-lowering medication. And if a person's put on cholesterol-lowering medication, how long are they told they're on it for? Life. We had a chemist do our program. She was 60. She said, "I'm a chemist." She said, "I'm not against drugs, it's my job." She said, "I work in a hospital 3 days a week and I have my own private practice." But she said, "I'm really annoyed," because she said last year a circular went out in Australia that anyone with a cholesterol lowering above 190 had to go on cholesterol lowering medication. She said, "You know why I'm annoyed? It's just a money-making scheme." She said, because if a person's on antibiotics, how long are they on it for? A week. They're not going to make a lot of money out of that. But if they're put on cholesterol-lowering medication, they're for life. Here's a chemist. She said, "It's just a money-making scam." She said, "That's what annoys me." When I was in America, a young girl did our program. This is, I think, our last retreat. She said, "Barbara, I've just been told my cholesterol levels are dangerously high and I have to go on cholesterol-lowering medication." She's 33. I said, "What are they?" She said, 190. I said, "That is normal. Don't touch them." Now, are you ready for the side effects of cholesterol-lowering medication? Alzheimer's, dementia, memory loss, muscle wasting, and they've just added another one, breast cancer, because our sex hormones are made from cholesterol. Interested? All your statin drugs, these are the side effects. How many people are getting memory loss because of their cholesterol-lowering medication and they're blaming age? Okay, so we've looked at a few things here. People are also told to go on a fat-free diet, yeah? And yet the fattiest organ in the body is the brain. And what's happening now is heart disease hasn't reduced, even with the change of figures, even with all the people on cholesterol-lowering medication. Even with all the people on fat-free diets, even with all the people stopping butter and eating margarine, that hasn't reduced. It is still the number one killer today. And what's the definition of insanity? I believe it's the greatest criminal medical hoax that's been put on humanity, this myth that cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease, because it is not true. And it has never been proven. Well, anyone can say anything. Where's my proof? Let me give you the title of 5 books, all written by doctors. One's called The Cholesterol Lie, by Dr. Dwight Lundell, cardiovascular surgeon who's performed 10,000 bypasses, and he's written a book called The Calcium Lie. Dr. Dwight Lundell. Number 2, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. He's written a book called The Great Cholesterol Con, cardiovascular surgeon. And in his book, he says there is no proof. What did I call it? The greatest criminal medical hoax. This is what Dr. Malcolm Kendrick said. For the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. From his book. Next one, The Great Cholesterol Deception by Dr. Peter Dingle. He's a PhD from Australia. The Great Cholesterol Myth by Johnny Bowden. What's the last one? The Great Cholesterol Hoax. So what have we got? Lie, con, deception, myth, hoax. They're running out of words. And there's a book called The Gut and Psychology by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. She's just written one. Your heart in your mouth. She's saying the same thing. Medical doctors. It's a myth. The Framingham Heart Study. Been going for 30 years. 30,000 people, some die, more come on. Do you know what they did find? Because remember, it was set up to prove that cholesterol and saturated fat cause heart disease, and it didn't. Do you know what they did show? That people with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's. I think I better give you a moment's silence for that one. Do you know who's always had a problem is the heart surgeons, because they have patients with low cholesterol levels who are having heart attacks. What causes heart disease is damage to the arterial wall. Dr. Agatha Thrash, she's passed now. She's a famous doctor who started Uchee Pines. She used to give this story. She had a lady come to her who was an alcoholic, and she had 80% occlusion of her main arteries. She went on a plant-based diet, started walking every day, exercise, walking. Plant-based diet. 10 months later, an embolism in her brain burst and she died. You see, because of all of those years of drinking alcohol, it had weakened her arteries. So Agatha Thrash did a post-mortem on her. She was intrigued as to what the state of her arteries would be, because 10 months before, they were 80% blocked, totally clear. Totally clear. So what clears those arteries, and they can clear, little tiny 2-letter word here that we can't forget, if you give them the right conditions. And that's the wonders of this plant food. The plant food can clear those arteries, because now the blood is thin. Now the quality of the blood is far superior. You see, meat and dairy products, when they burn in the body, they leave an acid waste. Whereas plant-based foods, on a whole, leave a alkaline. But if you're on a high carbohydrate diet, the one we talked about last night in the diabetes lecture, which is cereal and bread and cakes and pasta and pizzas, they all leave acid. So the plants that leave an alkaline residue are all your vegetables, most of your fruits, your seeds, nuts. There are some nuts that are a little bit more acid, but we need a balance. We need about 80% alkaline, 20% acid. And if someone's eating cereal and toast for breakfast, sandwiches for lunch, pasta for tea, that's almost 100% acid. And you will find that just as many vegetarians are having heart attacks as meat eaters. Am I right? So we actually just can't blame the meat. Can you see there's many factors there. And isn't it good news that those arteries can be cleared? In fact, Agatha Thrash, that's why she did the post-mortem, because she had a perfect situation where she was able, because 10 months before, she had the test that showed it was almost totally blocked. So if a person has a cholesterol reading of 250, are they safe? It's hard to say, isn't it? But you know what? Many people stay on their medication because of this. What I'm giving you is the facts. And what I've also done is I've given you the name of 5 books that you can search out for yourself, because you need to know the facts. So we need to have the facts, and when we've got the facts, then we've got the faith. So when David Harris did our program, my friend who's the chiropractor that had the 5 bypasses, He was still on some blood thinning medication and he was still on some cholesterol-lowering medication because his doctor said that he would die. He would have another heart attack if he didn't stay on them. After learning the facts, because at our health retreat, the books are all there, but you can search them out yourself. After increasing this, you see, he also was not eating enough legumes. You see, he learnt that he didn't have to go on that swordfish. All he had to do was start eating beans every day. Start having 8 to 10 nuts after every meal. Start sprinkling every salad and every breakfast with the seeds. And he could up his proteins that way. He also learnt to stop drinking with his meals because many people are eating the protein but they're not accessing it because they're watering down their hydrochloric acid. You see how all the pieces of jigsaw have to be in place. So you consider Captain Cook, I say Captain Cook because I'm an Australian, landing on the South Pacific Islands, and he was confronted with the most magnificent specimens of humanity he had ever seen. The men were tall, strong, agile. The women were beautiful. What did they eat every meal? Every meal? Coconut. White man came on and said, stop eating the coconut, it's a saturated fat, it's going to give you heart disease. They said, what's that? And white man introduced 5 lethal whites: white rice, white flour, white sugar, white refined salt, and white cow's milk. And those 5 lethal whites are doing their job. They have heart disease now. They didn't even know of heart disease. So can you see that this theory that saturated fat causes heart disease is erroneous? So where did it come from? A man named Ancel Keys. And you can read of his story in Dr. Malcolm Kendrick's book, The Great Cholesterol Con. Now, he put forth this theory that he believed that blockage cholesterol was because of fat that we were eating. And so he studied 17 countries looking for proof of his theory. Well, he had to eliminate a whole lot of them. He had to eliminate the Maasai. Do you know the Maasai live on blood, meat and milk? 0 heart disease. Now, they don't live a very long life. They die from other problems, but they don't die from heart disease. And if saturated fat caused heart disease, wouldn't they be dropping off like flies? So he had to eliminate that. He had to eliminate the Norwegians. He had to eliminate the French. And the countries that he chose appeared to support the theory. But it actually wasn't the butter on the bread, it was the bread under the butter. And it actually wasn't the olive oil on the pasta, it was the pasta under the olive oil. Can you see that? Fat's been shot because of who it's hanging around with. Have you heard of the ketogenic diet? Ketogenic diet is a high-fat diet. It was first put together in about the 1920s because in the Johns Hopkins Hospital in America, a group of doctors were fasting their epileptic patients and the seizures stopped. You see, when you fast, your body lives on fat, yep? Your fat stores. And the liver was converting that fat to ketones. And ketones, they discovered, are neurohealers. Ketones are neuroprotectors. So the seizures were stopping. But you've got to eat. So they came up with the ketogenic diet. And the ketogenic diet is a high-fat diet. Eating half a pound of butter per meal, eggs, huge amount of fats. But in 90% of the cases, the seizures stayed away. It's very hard to stay on that very high-fat diet. Now, in his book, Stop Alzheimer's Now, Dr. Bruce Fife, he talks about the ketogenic diet, and he makes a little adjustment. He calls it the coconut ketogenic diet. And the coconut ketogenic diet is what we've been talking about this week. Drop the carbohydrates down. Eat high fibre, generous proteins, healthy fats. And what are your healthy fats? Your nuts and your seeds. And as we've looked at this week, the 2 oils that come from the flesh of the plant, the olive oil, the coconut oil. He suggests starting with a teaspoon of coconut oil 3 times a day and building up to 4 teaspoons of coconut oil 3 times a day. He calls it the coconut ketogenic diet, which is a lot easier to eat. Now, he says meat, I say legumes, nuts and seeds. So you can do it on a vegetarian diet. And some say, but legumes have got carbs. Well, they do, but not much. In fact, the legume has about 1/3 the carbohydrate that you will find in the grain. But one observation, the people that are on the ketogenic diet, high fat, they're not dying of heart disease. That's more evidence that it's not the fat. It's not the fat. And the South Pacific Islanders who were eating coconut 3 times a day for centuries, more illustration that it's not the fat. And so last year, the FDA in America, they put up on Facebook, on social media, stop the coconut. Research is showing that it's actually dangerous for you. Who are you going to believe? What are the FDA going to say? Well, the problem is America doesn't grow coconut, so they're not going to make much money out of it. They grow a lot of grain. So what sort of oils do they want you to eat? the sunflower, the peanut, what they grow. Can you see you've got to look behind the scenes? That's why we're the doctor. And it's got to make sense. What does God say in Isaiah 1:18? Come, let us reason together. God has given us a brain to reason these things out. And remember, never make a decision on fear. You've got to make it on the facts. So remember that name. And in the book, The Great Cholesterol Con, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick said, he quotes Ansel Keys as saying, look, the research isn't quite there, but we're sure it's going to come. Is that science? Huh? No. So what if someone has a cholesterol level above 300? Do you know what you have to look at then is why? Is it because they've got a mouthful of mercury fillings? And you know what that fat's doing? Protecting their brain cell from the damage of the mercury. Can you see why you've got to look at why? And we've got a problem in Australia today, it's called vitamin D deficiency. Why is there vitamin D deficiency? Well, vitamin D is made from cholesterol. So when you've got people on cholesterol-lowering medications, what's their vitamin D going to be like? Can you see how someone is in great danger if they have a mouthful of mercury, they're eating a lot of fish, they're on a fat-free diet, and they're on cholesterol-lowering medication? That is a recipe for disaster. Now, where do you think the enemy of souls wants to take down in our body? What part? Isn't it the part that where mankind communicates with God? So if your brain's the fattiest organ in the body, what's the enemy of souls want you to do? Stop fat. Can you see that? Do you know what they're calling Alzheimer's, diabetes type 3 now? Because that high carbohydrate diet, and there are some presenters claiming that fat is contributing to diabetes. I don't get that one. The only fat that can contribute to diabetes is margarine. Because it's an altered fat, it can actually block the receptor sites. You see, the brain cell is actually 70% fat, the membrane around it. It's the fattiest organ in the body. It loves fat. It loves fat as fuel. Now, coconut oil and olive oil are very concentrated foods. You don't need a lot. I don't eat a lot. But I would have maybe 2 teaspoons of olive oil a day on my food. Love it on my vegetables, love it on my soups. But if I had Alzheimer's, I'd probably be taking 3 tablespoons of coconut oil a day. And in the book, Stop Alzheimer's Now, he gives stories of people who started the coconut oil and were able to turn Alzheimer's around. He's also got a book called Stop Autism Now and shows that the coconut oil, because it's a neurohealer, you know, the ketones that it produces, can actually even turn that around. So in both of his books, see, Stop Autism Now is about all childhood neurodegeneration. Stop Alzheimer's Now is about all adult neurodegeneration. So that's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, Huntington's chorea, multiple sclerosis, all of that. Multiple sclerosis is a deterioration of the myelin sheath. The number one culprit of that is mercury. Stop Autism Now is about all cases of childhood neurodegeneration. So Asperger's, also attention deficit syndrome, hyperactivity, as well as autism and epilepsy in children. And in both books, I think about the 3rd or the 4th chapter is called The Ketone Miracle, showing how these ketones can heal the brain cells. So you don't have to go for the marijuana. You can go for that coconut oil. It is a healer. So I trust I've dispelled that theory, and that's all it is, a theory that is yet to be proven. So no wonder the enemy of souls wants us all to believe that, because he wants to take our mind down. Did you know that no one need get Alzheimer's? Have you read about it in the Bible? I haven't, except for Nebuchadnezzar, who ate grass for 7 years because he defied God. No. A lot of people go down in the brain because of dehydration, because of lack of nutrition, because of mercury, because of cholesterol-lowering medications. Can you see all that? And there is no need. So we're looking at what we need to do to conquer heart disease, to conquer high blood pressure. Exercise is imperative. Accessing air quality, or assessing, having your water and the salt, the magnesium, but also the diet that's high in fibre with generous proteins and healthy fats. So we'll put down here the olive and the coconut. What about cardia, aspirin? In fact, I read in the newspaper that they're claiming that everyone over the age of 45 should have a baby aspirin a day, half an aspirin. Do you know what the research is showing now? Aspirin is causing eye bleeds, so that's causing a deterioration of eyesight, and aspirin is causing brain bleeds. Brain bleeds, there's a contributing factor to Alzheimer's, so there's another one that comes in. I said to one lady, I said, you know, if you choose, you can stop your baby aspirin. She said, oh, I cannot. I said, why not? She said, the doctor said I will die. Do you know what one lady said to me? That when her doctor said to her, you've actually only got 6 months to live, she said, you're not God. You can't tell me when I'm, And you know, sometimes when that seed is planted, it takes root. Job says, the thing I feared most, I got. It's actually a principle. And on Saturday morning, I will be going to headquarters and showing you these things. So it's very important to always have the attitude, you know this one, of gratitude. And the Bible verse for that is 1 Thessalonians 5:18, where the Bible says, "In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you." Because stress and anxiety can influence. But I maintain in a well-rested, well-nourished, well-watered, well-mineralised, well-sunned body, that body copes with stress. But what can tip the scales is constant distress. So anyone that has distress in their life, they've got to put the detective hat on and find out what's going on here and what can I do to ease this. Do I move? Do I? Because God is a God of solutions, is that right? And he's called the mighty counselor, yeah? The everlasting Father. He has the answers for us. 1 Peter 5 verse 7 says, "Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you." And in the little book, Steps to Christ, page 100, it says, "Keep your wants, your joys, your sorrows, your cares, your fears before God. You cannot burden him and you cannot weary him." He rules over the affairs of the universe. Nothing is too small or too hard for him to deal with. So the attitude of gratitude is very important to dispel stress in our lives. And on Saturday morning, I'll be showing you how even panic attacks can be conquered. And this is one of the principles that you do it. You feel a panic attack coming, what do? Thank you, Father. Thank you, thank you. Breathe deeply. Oxygen's great. Number 8, early nights. Because these are the hours that your heart is recharging, between the hours of 10 and 3 a.m. This is when your arteries are healing. This is when healing accelerates to twice the rate. But what if you can't sleep well? Have the lights off, lie down, and just say, "Thank you, Father." Because even if you're not sound asleep, the fact that the lights are off and you're resting, your healing still happens. And there's one thing that'll interfere with you going back to sleep, and that is being annoyed at the fact that you're not asleep. Is that right? Thank you, Father, that I'm not asleep, because now I can go over my memory verses. Don't put that light on, and do not put that screen on. Then your pineal gland, which is actually responsible for rest and rejuvenation, it just shuts down. Just shuts down. Now I'm going to look at herbs, because Psalm 104 verse 14, the Bible says God gave herbs for the service of man. And he gave a herb, a specific for the heart. It's called the hawthorn berry. The hawthorn berry is an illustration of Psalm 104 verse 14, because it comes to serve you. If your blood pressure's low, it'll bring it up. If it's high, it'll bring it down. Now drugs, when they come into your body, they say, "Get out of my way, I've got a job to do whether you need it or not." So when you start implementing all of this and your blood pressure starts to drop, you've got to be careful if you're on medication, because it can take you too low. But I've met people on 3 blood pressure medications and their blood pressure's through the roof. And I say, "Well, is it doing it?" And on top of that, you've got all your side effects. What can also help, and we've been learning how to do this, especially last night, is weight loss. When the person starts to lose more weight, the heart doesn't have to work so hard. And the easiest way to lose weight, and tomorrow night we're going to put another factor in on that when we look at hormones. Because high estrogen, very difficult to lose weight if the estrogen levels are high. And I'll be looking at that tomorrow night and how that can be resolved. But the easiest way to lose weight is to eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, and tea like a pauper. Early nights. Have most of your food at breakfast and lunch, and drop the carbohydrates, because remember what the high carbohydrate stores as? Fat. Fat doesn't make you fat. It's the carbohydrates. And exercise. Do you remember the human growth hormone we looked at last night that's released when you're exercising, which actually causes the fat to start getting broken down? So let's go to the hawthorn berry. The hawthorn berry is so safe, you can take it while you're on medication. If you prefer to do it that way, you can. It will not interfere with any medication. Now, the hawthorn berry can be taken as a tea, or you can buy it in a tablet form. So when you buy it in a tablet form, ideally you look for a tablet that's about 1,000 milligrams, and in a day you can take 3,000 to 6,000 milligrams very safely. But what I say to people, start with, say, 3 tablets a day, see what happens. And you are not to take your blood pressure every day. We had a lady do our program. She was getting up at 3:30 in the morning and taking the blood pressure. And she was taking it again at 5:30. And she was saying, "Sister Barbara, look, it's this." Eh? I said to her, "I've got some advice for you." She said, "What's that?" I said, "Don't take your blood pressure anymore. Stop. Maybe take it once a week. And not when you've just run up a hill. Not when you've just had a stressful phone call. You've heard of white coat blood pressure, haven't you? As soon as the person sits in the doctor's surgery and sees the white coat, up goes their blood pressure. Changes all through the day. So you can take quite a high dose of that. But there's no need to start with 6,000, start with 2,000, 3,000. I don't find blood pressure changes much in a week at our health retreat, whereas blood glucose levels can change very quickly. But you know what I do find? People are emailing me 2 months later, 3 months later, 4 months later. Then they're seeing the effect. So I'll give you the story of Henry. It's a remarkable story. He was a retired judge. When he came to us, he was 68. He was on 6 medications, 1 for blood thinning, 1 for blood cholesterol, 1 for blood pressure, 1 for blood sugar, 1 for gout, and 1 for, what was the other one? Reflux, stomach ulcers. I said, would you like to come off your medication? He said, no, thank you very much. I'm very happy with my medication. I respect everyone's choice. We put him on the hawthorn berry. We had the dried berries, so we're making him the tea. He would drink a litre a day. We had him on magnesium. He learnt about the plant-based diet, the exercise. He took some hawthorn berries home with him. He rang me 4 months later. 4 months later. He said, Barbara, I'd like to visit if I may and get some more hawthorn berries. I said, certainly, Henry, come for lunch. Now, when he knocked on the door and I opened the door, I did not recognise this man. In 4 months, he'd lost 20 kilo. What would that be, 40 pound? He said, look, I can do my coat up. He'd lost the puffiness in his face. I said, wow, Henry, you're looking good. He said, sit down, I've got some stories for you. He said, I went to the doctor 2 weeks ago to have my blood pressure taken, and he took it and got up and went to walk out of the room. And Henry said, what are you doing? He said, the machine's broken. Henry said, why do you say that? He said, well, your blood pressure's 165 on 100. Notice that on medication. He said, this machine says that your blood pressure is 140 on 75. Must be broken. Henry said, no, it's my blood pressure now. The doctor took him off his cholesterol-lowering medication because his cholesterol levels had come down. Took him off his blood sugar because the sugar was perfect. Took him off his thinning because his blood thinning was perfect. In fact, everything had come back to normal. Who took him off his medication? His doctor. Because the doctor knows if he stays on it, his blood pressure will go too low and he'll start fainting everywhere. His blood thinning will get too thin and he'll start bleeding everywhere. Can you see that? That's what drugs do. They just do it. And by the way, sometimes they don't do it. It's a remarkable story because Henry stayed on his medication, but what did he change? He implemented all of this. He said, I don't have gout anymore. I don't have stomach ulcers anymore. And he said, and the doctor said, I don't need my total knee replacements anymore because the knees are happy, because the weight's gone. They don't like all that weight. I said, impressive, Henry. I said, tell me what you're eating for breakfast. He said, for breakfast I have a spaghetti bowl full of different fruits. I go for the low GI fruits. He said, I have some whole grain cereal, millet or quinoa, sometimes oat, and then I have coconut cream on top. Did you hear that? 40 pounds lost on coconut cream. And seeds, and then a slice of sourdough spelt toast with avocado and tomato. Is that a light diet? That's not a light diet, is it? He said, I don't eat again till lunch, then I have a big salad. He said, I have some vegetables, either baked or stir-fried or steamed, and then I have some sort of protein. I might have lentil patties, or I might have falafel, or, there's so many things, or lentil dal. And he said, and I might have another slice of sourdough toast with avocado and tomato. Not a light diet. And I'll never forget what he said next, and he said, I do not eat again till breakfast. He says, like I'm not even on a diet. I said, impressive. Do you know he's not on the hawthorn berry now? You see, that's just until the heart rate comes back to normal. Henry wrote. He wrote me a letter. A year later, he said 38 kilos lost. What's that, nearly 80 pounds? Impressive. I think he's probably just about ready to go back to the bench, yeah? How many bodies and minds are deteriorating too young? Too young. God's looking for workers, yeah? And so many have gone down through ignorance. Yeah? Ignorance. And God winks at our ignorance. Sorry, after being here, there's no more ignorance. But God understands where we are. And if your cupboards are full of things you shouldn't eat, start when it's full of the good stuff. You know what I mean? You just start where you are. Rome wasn't built in a day. Little by little. But mark on your calendar when you start. Because remember, once the wheat is out of your body, and it might take 2 months to get out. Another herb is the cayenne pepper. Now we're looking at keep the heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. This is the issues of life, the blood. So cayenne pepper. So my suggestion is, if you're using this medicinally as a blood thinner, start with 1/4 teaspoon in a little water 3 times daily. So that's with each meal. You'll also boost your hydrochloric acid and digestion as well. There's a book that you can get, it's an ebook, and it's called Curing with Cayenne. And it's by Sam Biser, B-I-S-E, it's an ebook. Whole book on cayenne pepper. And he shows in there that it can rebuild heart muscle. So cayenne pepper not only thins the blood, it strengthens the arterial walls. More than that, it opens the capillaries. See, at our health retreat, we had a lady one day in the cooking class that had a heart attack. She was in her 80s. Her husband said she'd already had 2 that year. So I get the call, Barbara, lady's had a heart attack. I was only 3 minutes away, it's important to be fit. Ran down. She's lying on the ground and she's half conscious, her face is white. There's a guy taking a pulse. He said, the pulse is nearly gone. I can hardly feel it. I said, cayenne pepper. I don't know how much I got. We did it in a hurry. Just got about half a teaspoon straight into her mouth. Gave her a bit of water. She was half conscious, had a couple of sips. The guy holding her pulse said, the pulse is strong. Do you know it takes 1 minute for 1 drop of blood to go around your whole body? This was a couple of minutes. All the colour came back in her face. I'd read about it and now I saw it. She sat up and basically said, what happened? Everyone in the room, there were about 16 people there, they were going, wow. I said, no, it's not me, it's the cayenne pepper. We sold out of cayenne pepper, that program. I travel with it, it's everywhere. So someone has a heart attack on the plane, waiting for the doctor to come, just slip it in. What's that red in their mouth? I don't know, just give them a bit of water. We said to the lady later, could you feel it hot? She said, I didn't notice it. Isn't that incredible? So it's a very powerful herb, very powerful. What also thins the blood is omega-3. So I showed you briefly the omegas yesterday. So this is chia. Remember those 3 double bonds causing a very thin fluid oil? Chia, flax, grind up the flaxseed on your breakfast every day. And walnuts. Other blood thinners are ginger. Put it in your stir fries, put it in your soup, grate it up and pour boiling water on it. Delicious tea. Garlic. A lot of research has been done on the garlic for heart health. Hippocrates said, let food be your medicine and medicine be your food. In Australia, we have Medicare, so medicines and doctor visits are free. I don't like it at all because it's abused. In Australia, the wages are high and the taxes are very, very high. Whereas in countries where healthcare isn't free, people are more likely to consider the natural alternatives, because they've got to pay anyway. But you know what I say to people? You've got nothing to lose with this. You try a drug and you've got a lot to lose. You might have bad side effects. But you've got nothing to lose with this. So they're the herbs that you can take to thin the blood. And if someone's on blood thinning medication, they need to be regularly tested because their blood's going to get very thin. Not because of this, but because of the drug. You can have half a cup of cayenne pepper a day, an extreme amount of all this, and you will never bleed to death. Your blood will never get so thin that you'll just scrape it and it'll just bleed out and you can't stop it, like what happens on the drugs. And if someone's having an operation, they have to stop all their blood thinners. Otherwise, they'll bleed to death on the operating table. A bit scary, isn't it? It's very scary. Lady just emailed me today and her son is on warfarin and it's interfering with his epileptic medication. I wrote back and I said, please stop it immediately. You see, he's got a clot in his leg, but do you know that the warfarin doesn't disperse a clot? It just thins the blood. But do you know what can disperse a clot? Cayenne pepper. The omega-3s. The ginger and the garlic, they can disperse a clot. Psalm 104 verse 14, I'm sure you all know it by now. God gave herbs for the service of man. You see, repetition is the mother of retention, and repetition deepens the impression. Is it that simple? Do you know it is? But before we finish, number 10 is stop. There are some things that must stop, and one is caffeine. Because caffeine is well known to shoot that blood pressure up. Because when a person has a cup of coffee, it's just like they've seen a tiger on the path. Adrenaline goes up, blood pressure rises. The other thing that you must stop is wheat. Why wheat? Well, wheat was hybridised in the 50s. It changed the structure. And if a person has a wheat intolerance or even a sensitivity and the wheat goes into their body, their heart rate rises. So that can be contributing to high blood pressure. What also must stop is the refined sugar. You know that refined sugar is a contributing factor to the damage in the arterial walls. It's a pure acid. It's pure crystallised acid. Whereas honey, maple syrup, stevia, even palm sugar. Palm sugar is just the crystallised nectar of the palm flower. So there are some things that must stop. Cigarettes or tobacco and alcohol. It's interesting that even medicine acknowledges how damaging tobacco is to the arterial wall, contributing to the build-up, the arteriosclerosis or atherosclerosis. So the Bible says, God is speaking to each one of us when he says, keep the heart with all diligence. You might not have known how to do that an hour and a half ago, but you know now how to keep that heart with all diligence, because out of it are the issues of life. The heart pumps the blood. And that heart has to be working well to get that blood to the brain, which is where we communicate with God. So when God says in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies, your heart, your blood, living sacrifices to God, holy and acceptable, which is your reasonable service. You know why it's such a reasonable service? Is because we're the ones living in the body. But don't be conformed to this world. And in this world, these articles of food are freely taken, yeah. Don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good, acceptable and perfect will of God. And what is God's perfect and acceptable will? Is that we, above all things, should be in health. I've left a little bit of time at the end of our lecture for the many questions. Was there a mercy out there? Mercy. Okay, some of them we can whiz through, and some of them we'll be answering tomorrow night. Any way to resolve an umbilical hernia during pregnancy? Not really, because that stomach is getting stretched. So, and every time you cough, and every time you laugh, and every time you go to the bathroom, guess what? Those muscles can open. So what you can do is you can rub castor oil into it, you could rub coconut oil into it until the pregnancy passes. And hopefully then you can get some healing. How do I get rid of knots, muscle tension? Stretching. Does everyone stretch? We should stretch every day. Stretch our legs and our arms. But magnesium oil is very good at dissolving hard muscle that's gone into knots. Two things will melt hard muscle, knotted, cramped muscle. That is moist heat, so get the shower onto it, hot shower, and also magnesium, so magnesium oil. It's become quite popular in Australia. A lot of massage therapists use the magnesium oil. Is lupus curable with natural remedies and lifestyle? It certainly is manageable. Everyone I know is managing something, and if you can manage it, you're doing well. So how do you manage it? You'll probably noticed in just about every lecture, I come back to 8 laws of health. And the little book, The Ministry of Healing, and I'm sure they may have some here in this church. It's an excellent little book. On page 127, it lists the 8 laws of health, which is pure air, sunshine, not taking anything into the body that will harm it, rest, exercise, proper diet, use of water, trust in divine power. These are the true remedies, says the writer, and I believe it. The hawthorn berry is a very good heart herb, but you know it's not going to do much if you haven't implemented those laws. And you know, a lot of autoimmune diseases are arising because of childhood vaccinations. That's a little scary. How long do you have to stay on stage 1 of the antifungal diet before you move to stage 2? How long should you have to stay on phase 2? Now, phase 2 and phase 1 antifungal diets are in my book. Now, if someone's had a yeast problem for 30 years, they should probably stay on phase 1, which is hardly any sweet at all, for probably a few months. And then stage 2, where they start to have some berries, start to have a little bit more. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it's in my book. Now, regarding my book, a box of my books went to Amazon today. So they will be available. A box was sent not long ago. Also, I've been talking and with my daughter today, and she's going to be sending a box of books here on Monday morning. Actually, she's going to do it tomorrow morning, so they may be available. So the church will let you know that one. So that stage 1 and 2 is in my book, How to Conquer Cancer and How to Conquer Yeast in the Body. If we are only to eat 8 to 10 nuts a day, what about nut-based milk? There's not much nuts in nut-based milk. So here's the rule of thumb for nut butters, creams and milks. So 1 cup of nut, 1 cup of water is your butter. 1 cup of nut, 2 cups of water is your cream. 1 cup of nut, 4 cups of water is your milk. So when you're having nut milk, you're not having much. There's not a lot of nuts in that. What do you do for neuropathy? Are you familiar with neuropathy? That's when the feeling's gone in your feet. If someone has no feeling in their feet, they must not put their feet in hot water. They could walk on the sand and they could walk in the sea, and that stimulation will help. But there's a lecture on YouTube that I give on poultices, and there's a particular compress that can bring feeling back into feet, and it's a cayenne pepper compress. So you could Google my name poultices and you'll see the cayenne pepper. It'll bring life back down to those feet. And I've seen that happen several times. How do you heal from HPV virus of the cervix? Tomorrow night I'll be talking about hormones, and any problems or growths in the reproductive organs is usually caused by a hormonal imbalance. And that person can contact me too by email. There are some specific herbs that I have not got time to go into now that can help there. Is Earth Balance buttery spread safe? How about the coconut spread? I'm not familiar with the coconut spread. I'm not that familiar with the Earth Balance, but I do know it has not been hydrogenated like margarines. It's got a saturated fat in it. Really, you've just got to read your labels, and if you don't know what it means, it's easy to Google now, what every word means, isn't it? Remedies for Crohn's disease. Can I go over the remedies for Crohn's disease? Very easy. There are 3 irritants to the bowel when the Crohn's disease I'm sure you can help me here. Wheat, dairy, refined sugar. Those foods have to totally be eliminated. And then slippery elm. If a person's going to the toilet every half hour, they can take slippery elm every half hour. So depending on how often they go as to how much slippery elm they take. But slippery elm coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gut. I've seen many heal from that. Sports injuries. If you have sports injuries, can your blood pressure rise? Not usually. I guess if you're stressed out about it, it could. And if your sports injury prevents you exercising, that could certainly contribute to it. That's the beauty of the rebounding. Everyone can do that. Is tofu good for you? Yes, if it's non-GMO, organically grown. Do you believe in different foods? About your blood type. Did you know that horses have 17 different blood types and they all eat grass? Got the point? Can food allergies be reversed? I'll tell you some of the stories I get. Barbara, since I stopped wheat, dairy and refined sugar, I don't have a cat allergy. Another lady said, I don't have my horse allergy anymore. I don't have the dust mite allergy. So if someone has an allergy to a food, they've got to stop that food. And if someone says, but I like that food, you know what I say? Oh, okay. You just got to stop it. Now, sometimes you need to stop for 6 months, try the food again. Oops, the allergy's still there, stop. You might find after a year or 18 months you can have a little. But notice what I said, a little. You can ease into it. Is too much detoxing bad for you? And do you lose nutrients by detoxing? You don't usually lose nutrients by detoxing because the body starts to eat your fat stores. But you can detox too long. If you go to my liver section in my book, or even Barbara O'Neill liver lecture, you'll see that 2 days of juicing is enough. If you go longer than 2 days, too much body waste or environmental poisons start to come out, and your liver can basically start to break down. See, we're dealing with more environmental poisons than any generation that ever lived on the planet, but you can investigate that in more detail. Does detoxing make anxiety worse? It will if you're anxious about your detoxing, but it shouldn't. How do you get rid of earaches using onions? If you go to my poultice demo, I show you how to steam up an onion and put it on the ear. What the onion does is it draws waste out. The heat of the onion soothes and relaxes, and it can certainly help an earache. I've seen that happen many times. What can be done for Parkinson's disease? There's a book called Stop Alzheimer's now, Dr. Bruce Fife, and he talks about Parkinson's in there. You see, all the neurodegeneration diseases can be caused by a variety of things, but the coconut oil can heal them all. There's another book by Dr. Norman Doidge. He's a neuroscientist, and he's written a book called The Brain's Way of Healing. And he spends several chapters in there where he gives the story of this guy who stopped all deterioration of his Parkinson's and managing so well, they can't believe it. And the main thing is using his exercise. So there are some very good books showing how you can help with that. Are eggs bad for you? I leave the choice up to the person. If the chooks are genetically modified, if they're fed bad food, and if they're in little pens, those eggs are not good. But I meet people who have chooks that are free range and they feed it organic grain. Those eggs are much better. But I personally don't eat eggs, so I'll leave that up to the person. I prefer lentils myself. But at our health retreat, most of the people that come to us just got us off the net. They're not Christians, they're meat eaters, and knowing that they can have some healthy eggs is a real relief for them. So I leave it up to the person. If a change in diet could reverse diabetes, could a change in diet reverse sickle cell or at least manage it? Why and why not? That's right, why not? It's worth a try. If you begin to implement what you've heard in these lectures, I've seen many things turn around. Does diet really impact a person's temperament, mood, attitude and behaviour? Absolutely. Have you just watched what happens when you don't give the kids sugar anymore? They stop bouncing off the walls. And in Stop Autism Now, that's what he talks about, how the change in diet. He says you stop wheat, dairy, refined sugar on an autistic child, 50% improvement just by doing that. What is best for anxiety and autism? That's what we've been talking about. On Saturday morning, I'll show you strategies on how to overcome anxiety. And a lot of people, particularly women, suffer from anxiety because of a hormonal imbalance. So that's what we're going to look at tomorrow night. What happens to a bowel movement if you don't go when you need to go? It stays there. I don't know where else it's going to come out, but I know what the question means. And of course, that's a little bit scary, isn't it? It's still there. And one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed. So can you see the longer it's there, the more water that gets taken out, and then we've got cement, and it's not a very nice thought. Yeah. How do you get fat out of your liver? How to get fat out of your liver is not to stop fat. Because fatty liver is due to, in fact, I'll tell you quickly, it's very interesting. When fruit breaks down in your gut, it breaks down to glucose and fructose. Glucose and fructose are the singular structures that get into the blood. Then glucose and fructose get taken to the liver because the liver is the only organ that has fructose receptor sites. And what the liver does is it converts fructose to glucose and sends the glucose to the cell. But if the person's eating a lot of breads and cakes and donuts and things made with high fructose corn syrup, that's high amounts of fructose going in, and they're drinking huge amounts of juice that they just got from the shop that's got high amounts of fructose and sugar added, and sugar is a combination of fructose and glucose. Can you see how we're getting fructose overload? All that fructose goes to the liver, and the liver cannot convert it all to glucose, so it stores it on the liver as fat. So if you want to get the fat off the liver, get your fructose levels right down. Don't eat a lot of fruit, and get right away from those bought juices. You know how they say no added sugar? Well, it's like this. On a good year, they don't add sugar. But on a bad year, when the rains come at the wrong time and the fruit's a little bit bitter, by law, they can add sugar and say no added sugar. And if you ask them, they say, well, there's no added sugar once we got it to the right sweetener. You see that? That's like polyunsaturated margarine. Every margarine is saturated. Otherwise, it'd be liquid. So you say, well, why do you say polyunsaturated margarine? And this is their answer. Well, it was before we saturated it. You see the trick in advertising? What can I use for ringing in the ear? Stop the wheat, dairy, refined sugar. Because an allergy to that, or even a sensitivity to that, can cause build-up of mucus in that area. And that's one of the causes of ringing in the ear. How does popcorn affect your body? Got some good news. If it's non-GMO popcorn, it's very easy digestible. Because that heating breaks down the starch granules very quickly. So popcorn, how does it affect your body? It goes into your body like any other grain, but it's very easy to digest. So that's good news, but it must be non-GMO. Last night you talked about the gut and antacids and acid reflux. I take steroids and need to take another drug to help the lining of my stomach. What do you suggest? Well, we would need to investigate why the person's on steroids, because you can't just stop steroids. So that question needs a little bit more investigation. So what would we do? We would find out why they're on steroids and then fix that problem. So then the steroids could stop. Cycle vomiting syndrome, acid rising from the stomach. You'd have to investigate and find out what they're eating, and remember that valve needs magnesium and it needs a very light evening meal. What's the best way to prevent autoimmune diseases? Don't get vaccinated. That's one of the main. What I'm going to do is I'll stop at 8:30, so I'll do a couple more questions and we can do a few more tomorrow night, because I know everyone's eager to get home and get to bed so they're revived for tomorrow. Yeah. If a mother can't breastfeed their child, what is an alternative? You can go to the YouTube and get a lecture called What Shall I Feed My Baby? And in it, I show some alternatives. Goat's milk's probably one of the closest and easiest, but I'm just dialoguing with a lady that's got twins, and they're 5 months old, and she started to give them carrot, celery and apple juice. So that's 80% carrot, 10% celery, 10% apple. It's called the vegetarian's milk, because she could just about subsist on that. So she's starting to try them on that. So, and almond milk, but one would have to, probably the goat's is the best. And after about 6 months, you can go over to those others. What are the best recommended detoxes? Is the Master Cleanse ideal? Does everyone know what the Master Cleanse is? I think it's taking maple syrup, lemon and cayenne, is that right? Well, if you go to my YouTube lecture on liver, you will see that it is not ideal, because the body needs to be nutritionally supported through a detox. And we nutritionally support it at the health retreat with carrot, celery and apple juices every 2 hours, and also some protein drinks to help support the liver. So it is not ideal. I think we'll make this our last one. Where are your health retreats located? Yes. Do you have health retreats in America? There are 2 health retreats that are running our program now, and one is at Eden Valley in Denver, Colorado. So you can put Eden Valley and have a look. And another one is Living Springs in Roanoke, Alabama.